Hi, so my name's Edward, and in this video we're going to talk about target language, specifically for speaking lessons, because it's really important to know your target language when you're planning speaking lessons. Okay, so in this video we're going to cover what is target language and choosing target language, a little bit about planning lessons with target language, and I'll give you some examples. Okay, so let's get started. So, what is target language? Well, in a general sense, when we talk about target language, when we're teaching English, we mean the English language. But more specifically, we mean the specific words or expressions that are the focus of a lesson or activity. Okay, so usually when we talk about target language, we're talking about those specific aspects of grammar, or perhaps a set of vocabulary, or perhaps some expressions from a dialogue. Um, those things that are going to be the focus of your lesson or your activity. Okay. So target language, when you're choosing target language, it should be useful and suitable for the language level of your students. Okay, so not too easy, not too difficult, and also, language that is useful for your students to use. Now, useful language is different for different types of students. So think about the kind of language that your students will possibly need in the future. So, target language should also include a few variations. For example, a question and answer, affirmative and negative versions of the expressions, or options to change some of the words to make the sentences more personalized, or to use those sentences in different contexts. But target language shouldn't be so broad that students are expected to learn too many new words and expressions. Okay, so try to choose the right amount of target language. You want to give a few options, but you don't want to have so many new expressions that it's difficult for your students to learn in in the amount of time you have together. Okay, so here are some more tips about choosing target language. For younger and lower level learners, about 6 to 8 new words with a few sentences that use those words is a good amount. Okay, so you might have a few expressions, and in those expressions, one or two of the words can be changed for another word, similar word. Okay, so you might have a set of vocabulary that fits into your expression. So that's for young and low level learners. Now, for older or advanced learners, the teacher can introduce more expressions or a dialogue, including examples of the vocabulary or grammar. Okay, so advanced learners or higher level learners, you can use more expressions. And also you might want to give some context for those expressions, like a dialogue that is from a certain situation. Okay, so you might not stay with just a few expressions or a specific grammar point with higher level. Right, so about target language, when you're planning, the teacher should have a clear idea of exactly what is the target language. Now, this is really important. If you, as a teacher, don't know what your target language is, then how are your learners expected to know what they should be using or practicing or learning? Okay, so you need to have a really clear idea when you're planning your lesson. Now, teachers should also organize the stages and activities of the lesson based on the target language. So when you're planning, you need to look at the target language and think about how you can uh, have stages of your lesson that scaffold and develop the language. So that's related to the next point. Teachers should scaffold and support the learner, uh, support students to learn the target language. Okay, so this is related to how you sequence your lesson, how you introduce it, the target language, and practice it step by step. Okay, so the next point here is introduce the target language step by step in chunks of language. For example, teach the vocabulary first, or introduce the affirmative expressions first and practice the negative expressions later. So there are lots of different ways you can introduce target language step by step. You might break it down into smaller and easier manageable chunks, for example, starting with the target language, and then perhaps teaching a little bit more of the expression, and then teaching another related expression. Or you might choose to teach the affirmative expressions first and then the negative expressions later in the lesson, just to give students kind of step-by-step support and give them a chance to internalize the target language step by step. Okay, this is a lot better than trying to teach all of the target language at the beginning of the lesson, and maybe you're teaching too much and the learners are not going to find it easy to remember easily. Okay. Okay, so finally, here are some examples of target language. And if you look in textbooks, you can have a look at the contents page. And usually the target language is organized and sequenced very well. So here are just a few examples. Here you've got vocabulary sets. Okay, so shapes, for example, circle, square, triangle, rectangle. You've got weather words like rainy, cloudy, windy, snowy, and buildings like hotel, bank, restaurant, etc. Okay, so those are some vocabulary sets that are common for beginners. Okay, and of course you might teach some expressions to go with those vocabulary sets. Okay, the next column here you've got grammar and expressions. Okay, now you might be teaching a grammar point specifically, or you might just be teaching some common expressions that people use when they're. So there's just a few examples here. It's a banana. Okay, you might teach what is it? It's a banana with that. Do you like soccer? Okay, of course you would teach the answers yes I do or no I don't. We are reading. Okay. Now in that example you might teach other verbs. For example, we are reading, we are playing, we are listening. Or you might choose to teach other pronouns also, like we are reading, they are reading. The next example here, I went to the museum. Okay, and look at those expressions. I'm sure you can imagine that some of those words could be part of a vocabulary set. You might choose to teach other words that you can fit. Okay, the final column here is situational or functional language. So this is when learners are starting to develop a little bit more, perhaps lower intermediate level, going up to advanced. Okay. So situational language is language that is related to a specific situation. For example, situation when we travel or business context. And functional language is why we are using the language. So functional language, language functions are the reasons we're using language. For example, asking about things around us, or sharing our opinions, or perhaps creative language. So just a few examples here. We've got airport travel. So this is situational. A few examples. Do you have a passport? And where is the departure? So notice that there are different expressions there, different types of vocabulary as well, but they're all related to the same situation. The next example is situational language, seeing a doctor. I have a cold, take this medicine, have a rest. Expressions like that are used when we see the doctor. And the final example is functional language. So here we have expressing opinions. I think that, I disagree with you, and so on. So those are expressions we use when we're expressing. So if you're interested in finding more about functional language, you can have a look online for Halliday's 7 language functions. And there's lots of information online. You can find more examples. So those are just a few examples of target language. When you're planning your lesson, choose your target language carefully, and the teacher needs to be really clear about exactly what you're teaching. Okay? So I hope this video helps you to understand target language and a little bit more about some of the aspects you need to consider when you're choosing and planning your lessons. Okay, bye-bye.